Hello and welcome to day 56 of 365 days to racial change. My name is Tom Nyback. Welcome and thanks for sticking around for another day to chime in and hear about different aspects of issues of color and race in America. How the black perspective differs from the white perspective. We're talking about economics, privilege, power, domination, things like that. Most of it coming back and tying to the almighty dollar here. And we're informed primarily by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson, and he's written 3 exceptional works that really enlightened me and educated me about these issues that still prevail in America, even though slavery's been gone, even though we've waded ourselves through Jim Crow and semi-slavery, black codes, lynching, rapes, destruction of families, infiltration into black communities and neighborhoods ad infinitum. First book I read was A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Second book I read was Black Labor and White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice. We're coming out of this text today, out of chapter 3, Impediments to Power and Economic Justice, and series of myths, and we're on the 6th one, starting on page 58. It is the myth of sexism being equal to racism. I'll unpack that in a moment. And finally, the third text of his that I read was Powernomics, his national plan to empower Black America. You can also see behind me, hashtag us too, hashtag USTOO. You'll find mostly black women talking about black issues there on that forum. There's also Blag Enough, BLAGGENUF. We'll give you more of the same forum as kind of a black Facebook. Also, I don't have the text with me here now, but I want you all to get the fictional account of slave life in America written by a white woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe, an abolitionist, through the mid-1800s. And it's a very good fictional account of slave life. We follow a man named Tom, affectionately nicknamed Uncle Tom, and we look at his adventures through slave America, as through his family life, and we get some peripheral narratives from other slaves, other slave masters, through that work. To get you up to speed, we just finished, I think it was chapter 5, and Tom's just found out that he has been sold. His master has gotten money troubles, and this is actually appears in the text to be a common phenomenon. Masters getting into trouble through gambling or maybe poor business practice, and they need to sell off some assets. Slaves are assets. An asset is an income-producing object, and that's what the black slave was. We don't take for granted slave masters having a very high moral compass. And anybody that is enslaving other human beings, especially the way it was done in America, you don't put a whole lot of moral fiber to these individuals. So these white men, would frivolously squander their property, and the fallout, the responsibility to fill that gap was the slave, female, male alike, and Tom is no different. As well as he does, he has status on the plantation. He's sought after by the slave masters and the slaves as a group, but that doesn't shield him from the powerful influence and effects of ignorant men who don't know how to handle their money. So we'll get into that maybe a couple days, maybe after this series. We'll check in on old Uncle Tom and see where he's at. Today, myth 6, sexism is not, well, sexism is equal to racism, which it is not. And, you'll hear me lump women in with other marginal groups, immigrants, gays, Jews, any group that's not black and does not put black interest and focus first is going to be a separate group, a separate issue. All those groups I just mentioned, and we can mention a ton more, have their issues because some facet of dominant white male authority is taking advantage of them. I'm not dismissing anyone's appropriate grievance. We've got a whole boatload going on. We can trace it to money and trace it to some white male is at the very top of all of the argument, the blame. But I lump women in there a lot, and I hope women do not get discouraged. And we're going to unpack why that is. I said it, I say it a lot, but today we're going to focus in and get more education on how this separation occurs. You could be a woman, gay, Jew, immigrant, all that. But see, if you're black first and you focus on that skin color, which makes no sense, the thing that makes least sense first, then you'll understand more of the marginalization. But don't come alongside blackness and try to equate yourself with that argument. There's just no equation, and we'll look at some of those aspects today. Day 56. The 60s was a great upheaval, and we'll recognize, okay, the 60s is a lot of marching and was a black focused. But once the blacks started getting their traction, you had other groups coming in, chiming in, coming along, kind of as a supportive role. But as we talked about a day or two ago, any group that comes in and aligns themselves with black concerns dilutes the black message. They end up getting the resources. They end up getting the attention that blacks rightly deserve. See, America doesn't want to have an agenda that exclusively addresses the black issue. America, since slavery time, has lied about giving rights and resources to blacks. America has prevented blacks from excelling and growing in black business. These land grants and land rushes and gold rushes and silver rushes and some of the raw mineral resources out west were denied blacks. We've always been marginalized, pushed into being a consumer class. So in the 60s, once we got our traction going again, we fell for another zinger where they gave us civil rights and social integration, but they didn't even really give us that. They wrote it down so that at least we can't overtly be discriminated against, so we can't be, you got to watch how you advertise things and watch how you exclude black people now. So we let the attitude and the mindset of racism go underground. It went underground. It didn't go away. You can't legislate the heart of man. So we fell for that. Also, once we did get some traction and the national attention, and our black brothers and sisters were starting to visit presidents and kings and organizations, and at least things were being written on the books to give us access to rights and resources. Now up jumps a whole lot of slew of other groups of immigrants and gays and women and things like that. And there goes all the traction and work that blacks did gets pushed aside and marginalized once again. Very sad. Very sad. So after the 60s, when some of the bloodshed, the assassinations were behind us to a degree, still an epidemic of young black men being shot just by white police. That's a phenomenon that we need to have specific laws of, accountability for these white cops. But that's another issue. But in the 70s, the issues between women's rights and black issues became linked. I mean, in America, it's such a funny place. America, history, we're all in line because some powerful white male group is running things. And they got us all chasing this carrot. And I'm starting to figure out ways to circumvent that power. It's an illusion. Yet so many groups are hook, line, and sinker into it. So it was the white people's turn, white women's turn, I'll say. They say women, but even in the women's issue initiative, there's still a color line, as we're going to see in a moment. So there's women running up. I think affirmative action came back into play. The 80s were pretty relaxed with our pot-smoking, promiscuous president, but they were very lucrative. And the gay issues came up through the 90s and things like that. So everybody seems to get a turn. But their turns are very productive, not so for black folks. Okay. So we need to, blacks need to keep their issues very exclusive, confined to the color of skin. That is our rally point. That is our camp right there, the color of skin. So, notice how groups, they'll latch on, they may even use some rhetoric to identify with the black issues like rights, inclusiveness, marginalization. They'll banter that around until their group gets some traction, their immigrant group, Hispanic group, gay group. Once they get that, they distance themselves quickly from the black experience. That black energy that they've stepped on, that they've used to elevate themselves. So here, but to answer specifically sexism versus racism, one of the issues was during some of the Reconstruction in this country, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, women worked to align their issues with some of the black liberties that were being proposed and forwarded through Congress. And like I said, right at the top of this piece, women and all these other groups have legitimate claims of right to vote, suffrage, things like that are very important. I'm glad that the country has gotten past a lot of those issues. We got in this presidential election, got more women than ever. And I think we're going to see that female president. Uh, I'm afraid, and this may be just because I'm a man, but I'm going to say this publicly here on the table. I'm afraid that once women get that office and that space, I'm afraid that there'll be a backlash, that pent up angst, generational angst built up over decades and centuries will come out, and I'm afraid of some kind of female black backlash against the phallus in America. That's my fear about white women in power, or any woman in power. Listen to me. So I mean that's the age old um, argument about men and women. Let's get back to race here. So during these 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, women. Now I'm going to say white women. I don't see a whole lot of those slave women or former slave women. This is the Reconstruction, is around Civil War and liberties written into the Constitution to free black people anyway. Um, but women wanted to, align their issues in there with the black cause, but these issues around slavery were just overwhelming, and they they still had a ways to go. Women still had a lot to navigate um, to get their rightful place at the table of freedom and having a say in the nation. Um, so to the 13th Amendment, what was directed toward abolishing slavery. 14th and 15th Amendment were amendments aimed at the right to vote, and the 14th Amendment was the right to vote in general. That right to vote not being um, you couldn't use race or position, place, color to prevent a person from voting. Although you had you get a black person comes to a polling station, and then they have to read or go through some type of test and exam. So this goes on um, back there, late 1800s, and it's still happening today. There's a court case, I forget which state, I think it's North Carolina, is wading through another case. It's like, people, get out of the way and let the person vote. What is the problem with you? They don't let people vote because they're going to put their proper people that are going to care for their communities in place. That's why they do it. You know, that's why they resist and stuff like that. So you got, like, even in the year 2019, you still have court cases of white individuals, impeding a black person's right to vote. That's sick. It's very selfish, and it's not a demonstration of America's potential and creed. You know, Literacy, some of this uh, morality are not prerequisites for voting. There is none. Voting is something reserved for American citizens of a certain age, of course. I will draw an age line. Other than that, get out of the way. You know. All right, get me started. So 14 to 15, that was the right to vote. 14th was the right to vote overall. Now women were still excluded. Now, and the 15th Amendment kind of it further sealed the fate of women for a season, because it specified that black men were permitted to vote. They made a very clear line of sexuality for the voting. So that was another issue that got women going, and encouraged them to make complaints and claims to Congress to be aligned with black issues and black concerns. You know, they're going to say, though, history is going to show us that women had to they had to come on their own as women. You know, it's troubling, but it's one time where at least the system was consistent and singular in its issue about who was coming to the table with their complaint. You know, after the 60s, groups came to the table for rights and resources. But before the 60s, it was the black issue, and then the women and stuff like that. That there was more singular focus of a group that made its way through the courts and persevered to get its yay or nay in America. So partly, and I'm not criticizing women for that approach. I'm just recognizing the country. You didn't put the country through that kind of too much stress. The country could do one subject at a time at those back then. So what we have is this problem where the major part of today's talk is about women wanting to come along and align themselves and identify with the black issue. And I don't want to also divorce the argument, because blacks had a lot of help through the ages. There were sensitive white folks, and white women were probably the closest ally, because they understood marginalization and oppression to a degree. They'd not been explicitly enslaved, whipped, at least had not reported sexual assault and things like that. But they did have some legitimate ways to identify with the black issue. Now, let's have some balance, okay? So before we go and take a big sigh and all that, I want you to understand some of this thought, is that black women probably don't understand this, and this is one reason why I need black women to understand the difference in the argument, that you must understand the color argument first. Way back in the 1800s, some thought of white women was that, I'm quoting, this is page 59 in Dr. Anderson's book, Black Labor and White Wealth, is that there's a quote here. It says, black women would be better off as the slave of an educated white man than of a degraded ignorant black one. You know, so even, and this was written uh, concerning a female feminist back in some of these early times, the 1800s, and the quote is telling that let's put sex as a common denominator, all people being women. White women would still find a place to marginalize black women. You see, it's a color barrier. That's why I'm not overly sensitive about being honest. That's why I like Dr. Anderson's work, because no one is immune. He talks about the black folks behaving improperly, you know, just as much. I think his language is even more, has more sharpness to it, you know, when he's addressing black folks, you know. So women, uh, yeah, you've got female issues, and there is marginalization, exclusion, and all these things, and women have to work harder and all that. But black women, please recognize that not all white women are on your side. It's the same way with us guys, okay? Um, us black guys are not perceived at the same level as those white guys, right? You know, those white guys still, they got their privilege, and they have so much entitlement and all that. They could care less about us niggas out here. Come on, let's get real. So be careful on two fronts. The female issues that exist in America, while valid, are not black issues. And also within the female community, there is a separation along the lines of skin color. Make no mistake about it. And that's going to exist well beyond anything I can do here in the brief time I got left on this earth. So think about that, um, ladies. You know, in this forum, we are twisted up because we're black. That all those other issues will come along later, but if we fix this black problem, if we get going economically, get going as a unit, um, you know, with one singular cohesive message, you know, then naturally we'll break down and talk about man, female, gays, immigrants, and religions and stuff like that, because mankind is just screwed up like that. Um, but this issue of the color of skin, we get that to the forefront and support one another uh, on that front. Then we'll have the privilege of arguing about man and woman and gays and stuff like that. Okay, I promise you, I guarantee it. If we come together, then we have the right to argue about all that other good stuff. Okay, we have the privilege. I'm Tom Nyback. It's day 56. Thanks for tuning in to 365 Days to Racial Change. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.